The ultrasound screen glowed softly in the dimly lit room. Clara Bennett lay on the exam table, one hand resting protectively on her belly, her eyes locked on the tiny heartbeat flickering across the monitor. The doctor smiled warmly, telling her the baby was strong. Clara forced a smile, but inside she felt the sharp sting of betrayal cutting deeper than any physical pain. At that exact moment, miles away, her husband Victor Hale was stepping out of a sleek black limousine. Cameras flashed like lightning as he guided a young woman, Selena Cross, into the dazzling lights of the Crystal Meridian Hotel. Victor looked sharp in his tailored tuxedo, his hand firmly resting on Selena's back, as if she were his queen. To the world, it was a scandalous surprise. To Clara, it was confirmation of what she already knew. For weeks, she had seen the signs. The late-night meetings, the unfamiliar perfume clinging to his suits, the secretive texts he would guard with his life. She hadn't needed anyone to tell her. Her instincts had whispered the truth long before her eyes saw it. But she had stayed silent. Silent for the child growing inside her. Silent because she knew patience would give her the moment to strike. Her chest rose and fell as she listened to the steady rhythm of her baby's heart. It was the only sound anchoring her in a storm of betrayal. Clara thought of Victor's arrogance, the way he had dismissed her as if she were nothing more than an inconvenience. He believed he could humiliate her, parade his mistress in front of the world, and walk away untouchable. But Victor didn't know Clara as well as he thought. He didn't know she was gathering every piece of proof, waiting for the night when his pride would blind him, when his downfall would be most spectacular. And that night was coming sooner than he imagined. Because when Clara walked into that gala, she wouldn't walk in alone. Clara Bennett was not the kind of woman you would expect to see caught in the middle of a scandal. At 29, she carried herself with the quiet dignity of someone who had always put others first. She had once been a rising star in architecture, known among her peers for her creativity and her ability to design buildings that felt like they could breathe with life. But all of that had been set aside when she married Victor Hale. At first, it seemed like a fairy tale. Clara had met Victor at a charity fundraiser 5 years earlier. He was already successful, charming, and surrounded by whispers of being the next tech giant. Yet he had noticed her, a woman in a modest black dress, pouring drinks for guests as a volunteer. When their eyes met, Clara felt as if the whole room had disappeared. Victor swept her off her feet with attention and promises. Promises of love, of family, of a future where they would rise together. For a while, Clara believed him. She gave up a prestigious position at a design firm to support his career, telling herself it was worth it to build a home together. She threw herself into being the wife who encouraged his ambition, who cooked his late-night meals, who cheered for every new deal he closed. When she learned she was pregnant, she thought it would be the missing piece that would finally make Victor appreciate her sacrifices. But instead of closeness, the pregnancy widened the distance. Victor became colder, more impatient. He criticized her for being tired, for not dressing up enough, for spending too much on groceries. He made her feel like a burden when all she wanted was to be cherished. And though Clara never admitted it out loud, she often lay awake at night, wondering if she had been foolish to believe in fairy tales. The truth came crashing down one evening when she discovered a hotel receipt in his jacket pocket. At first, she wanted to believe it was business. But then there was the lipstick stain, the fragrance of another woman lingering like poison in their home. And later, the whispers reached her. Whispers that Victor was seen with a young assistant, Selena Cross, who had no shame in clinging to him in public. Clara had cried that night, her tears soaking into the pillow as she cradled her stomach. But her pain was not just for herself, it was for the baby growing inside her, who deserved a life not built on lies. That night, something inside Clara shifted. She stopped being the naive, trusting wife and became a woman with a plan. She decided to stay silent, to let Victor think she was blind. Let him believe she was weak, because weakness was the mask that kept him careless. Behind her quiet eyes, Clara was watching everything. She kept the receipts, the messages, the photos. Each one was a weapon she tucked away, waiting for the day they would be used. Her friends begged her to leave, but Clara shook her head. She wasn't leaving empty-handed. She wasn't leaving humiliated. If Victor wanted to parade his mistress, then she would wait for the perfect moment to stand before them all and show the world who he really was. And that perfect moment was coming. The annual gala was only weeks away. Victor had already promised to make a special announcement. Clara knew what that meant. He planned to introduce Selena as his new partner in front of the city's most powerful people. What Victor didn't know was that Clara would be there too, dressed in power, holding her proof, and carrying the one secret that would shatter him completely. Because when she stepped into that ballroom, Victor would learn the cost of underestimating the woman he betrayed. The night of the Crystal Meridian Gala arrived like a storm disguised in diamonds. The hotel towered over the city with its glass walls shimmering in the glow of Manhattan's skyline. Inside, the grand ballroom was a masterpiece of excess. Golden chandeliers dripped like waterfalls of light, their crystals catching every flicker of 1,000 candles. The scent of imported roses and expensive champagne mingled in the air, heavy enough to make even the wealthiest guests feel intoxicated. It was the social event of the year. Politicians, celebrities, and business moguls brushed shoulders, their laughter echoing against the marble floors. Waiters in white gloves floated through the crowd with silver trays, balancing crystal flutes of champagne and hors d'oeuvres too pretty to eat. The air buzzed with conversations about billion-dollar deals, secret mergers, and the kind of gossip that could topple reputations in a single sentence. At the center of it all was Victor Hale. He stood tall in a midnight black tuxedo, his smile gleaming with self-satisfaction as cameras flashed around him. Beside him, Selena Cross sparkled in a daring scarlet gown, the slit running dangerously high as if to taunt anyone who dared to judge her. She clung to his arm like a prized possession, tilting her head toward his shoulder as photographers begged for more shots. Victor basked in it. To him, this was his coronation. He had clawed his way to the top of the tech world, and tonight he wanted the world to see the new jewel in his crown, Selena. Guests whispered behind manicured hands, some scandalized, others secretly envious. Everyone knew Victor was married. Everyone knew his wife, Clara, was pregnant, but in Victor's mind, none of that mattered. This was his night. As the orchestra swelled with Mozart's Symphony No. 40, Victor raised his glass to toast a group of investors. He bragged about a coming expansion, about how his company was on the verge of revolutionizing the industry. Every word dripped with arrogance. Selena smiled sweetly, pretending to be the supportive partner, though her eyes glimmered with the triumph of a woman who thought she had won. But beneath the glamour, tension rippled. Not everyone was impressed. A few wives exchanged knowing glances, shaking their heads at Selena's audacity. A senator muttered to his wife that Hale was playing a dangerous game, and the board members, those whose fortunes were tied to Victor's empire, watched him carefully, their expressions unreadable. Still, Victor felt untouchable. He believed the night was his stage, the ballroom his kingdom. He believed Clara was at home, crying into her pillow, powerless to stop him. He was wrong, because across the city Clara Bennett was preparing to walk into the very room where Victor believed he reigned supreme. Her dress, chosen with care, was not meant to make her disappear. It was meant to make her unforgettable. Her proof was tucked safely away, ready to expose his lies. And she was not walking in alone. At her side would be Damian Ward, a man with enough power and presence to rival Victor himself. The guests inside the ballroom had no idea the night was about to turn. They laughed, they toasted, they celebrated Victor's supposed success. And Victor, blinded by his own arrogance, could not see that his empire was about to crumble before the very same audience he had tried so hard to impress. Then, the heavy mahogany doors at the end of the hall creaked open. Heads turned. Conversations halted mid-sentence. The orchestra's melody faltered. Every eye in the room shifted to the entrance. And there, in the golden light of the doorway, stood a figure Victor never expected to see. Clara Bennett had arrived. Victor Hale had always believed he was smarter than everyone else in the room. To the public, he was the visionary tech billionaire who turned ideas into gold. To Clara, he was once the man who promised to love her until death. But behind the polished smile and expensive suits was a man consumed by hunger. Not the hunger for love, but for power, admiration, and control. Victor's rise to wealth had not been clean. Those who once partnered with him whispered of broken deals, of contracts twisted, until only Victor walked away with a profit. He was charming enough to hide his ruthlessness, and arrogant enough to believe no one could ever touch him. Clara had seen glimpses of this side early in their marriage. Sharp words when she disagreed, the cold silence when she didn't praise him enough. But she had pushed those moments aside, convincing herself they were flaws in an otherwise loving man. Selina Cross saw those flaws and adored them. At just 26, she had clawed her way up from a junior assistant to Victor's most visible companion. Ambition pulsed through her veins as fiercely as vanity. She loved expensive clothes, flashy jewelry, and the intoxicating thrill of walking into a room knowing all eyes were on her. Selina wasn't in love with Victor. She was in love with what being with Victor gave her: access, influence, and power by association. The two of them were a dangerous pair. Victor saw Selina as proof that he could have anything he wanted, anyone he wanted. She was a trophy, a reminder that he wasn't bound by the rules of marriage or morality. Selina saw Victor as her ticket out of obscurity, the golden key to a life she believed she deserved. Together they justified each other's worst impulses, feeding arrogance with vanity and vanity with greed. As Victor stood in the ballroom with Selina by his side, he felt invincible. He whispered into her ear, making promises that sounded like poetry, but dripped with contempt for the woman carrying his child at home. Selina giggled, brushing her hand against his chest, pretending not to notice the disapproving looks around them. She thrived on the scandal. Every raised eyebrow was fuel, every whispered judgment proof that she was finally someone important. But what neither of them realized was how fragile their throne truly was. Victor's arrogance blinded him to the silent anger of his board members, who had grown tired of his reckless personal life, tainting the company. Selina's pride blinded her to the fact that her entire identity depended on Victor's approval. The higher they climbed, the steeper their fall would be. Clara knew this better than anyone. She had seen the cruelty up close, the way Victor's words could slice deeper than knives, the way Selina smirked as if mocking Clara's very existence. She had endured the humiliation, the whispers, the loneliness of lying awake while her husband disappeared into the night, and she had vowed that one day, both of them would answer for it. The gala was their stage tonight. Victor believed he was about to introduce Selina as the new woman in his life. Selina believed she was about to be crowned queen of his empire. They didn't know that the woman they had discarded was standing just outside those doors, waiting with the kind of patience only a betrayed heart could hold. The villains were center stage, but the true story was about to begin. Because no matter how powerful Victor believed he was, no matter how glamorous Selina pretended to be, Clara held the one truth that would shatter them both. And in just a few moments, that truth would walk right into the room. The hunter and his mistress were about to become the prey. The grand ballroom shimmered under the weight of luxury, but the atmosphere grew tense as Victor Hale strode to the center stage with Selina Cross on his arm. His tuxedo glistened under the chandeliers, his grin wide enough to split his face. He tapped the microphone, the sound echoing across the hall like a gavel about to deliver a sentence. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice rich with false charm, "tonight is not just about celebrating our company's success, it is also about celebrating life, love, and the future we are building." Gasps rippled through the audience as he turned to Selina, his hand resting proudly on her waist. He was parading her openly, unashamed, as though his pregnant wife did not even exist. Selina leaned closer, her red dress blazing like a warning sign, her lips curling into a triumphant smile. Clara stood at the edge of the crowd, her heart pounding like a war drum. She had expected it, but seeing it unfold in front of her eyes cut deeper than she imagined. The man she once trusted with her soul was standing before hundreds of witnesses, humiliating her in the cruelest way possible. The sting of betrayal burned in her chest, but she held her head high. She would not cry. Not here. She glanced around the ballroom. Some guests whispered in shock, others smirked as if savoring the scandal. A few women looked at her with sympathy, but their pity only fueled her determination. Clara knew she wasn't here to be pitied. She was here to change the story. Victor lifted Selina's hand, raising it for the world to see. "Meet the woman who inspires me, who pushes me to be better, who represents everything our future stands for." The applause was hesitant at first, scattered and awkward, but Victor's investors, bound by politeness, joined in. The sound of clapping hands filled the ballroom, each beat striking Clara like a hammer. Selena basked in the attention, her eyes scanning the crowd until they landed on Clara. That smirk, the one Clara had seen in her nightmares, spread wider. It was the smirk of someone who thought she had won. Clara pressed her palm against her belly, steadying herself. The baby's heartbeat was her anchor, her reason to stand tall. She remembered the nights of tears, the mornings of silence, the countless times she begged Victor to notice her, only to be dismissed. All of it condensed into this one moment. But this was not her collapse. This was her turning point. For a brief second, Victor's gaze swept across the room and landed on her. His expression faltered. He hadn't expected her to show up. Not like this, dressed elegantly, glowing despite the weight of pregnancy. For the first time that night, his smile twitched. Clara's lips curved into the faintest smile, not of weakness but of power. She had been silent long enough. Every secret, every receipt, every piece of evidence she had collected burned in her mind like a weapon ready to be unleashed. The applause faded. The room buzzed with whispers again. Victor turned back to Selena, forcing his smile, trying to regain control. But Clara knew. She saw it in his eyes. Beneath the arrogance, there was fear. He knew she had come for a reason, and the night was far from over, because Clara was about to take the microphone and turn his proudest moment into his greatest shame. The applause from the gala still rang in Clara's ears long after she left the ballroom. She walked quickly through the marble corridors, her heels clicking against the polished floor, each step heavier than the last. She made it to the hotel's side exit, where the cold night air wrapped around her like a cruel embrace. For the first time all evening, her shoulders trembled. She had held her head high inside, but outside, away from the watching eyes, her strength cracked. Clara leaned against the stone wall, her hand clutching her stomach. The baby moved gently inside her, a reminder that she wasn't alone, even when she felt abandoned. Tears welled up, hot and unstoppable, streaking down her cheeks. She had prepared for this night, told herself she was ready, but nothing could soften the sharp pain of betrayal playing out in front of the entire city. Images replayed in her mind like broken glass, cutting her heart. Victor's hand on Selena's waist. His voice so confident, calling another woman his inspiration. The crowd clapping as if his lies were worth celebrating. And Selena's smirk, mocking, cruel, daring Clara to fight back. Her breath caught in her throat, turning into ragged sobs. She pressed her fist against her mouth to keep from crying out, but the sound of her heartbreak echoed in the empty street. For a moment she felt small, powerless, like a shadow of the woman she used to be. She thought of the years she had given Victor, her career, her youth, her trust. She thought of the late nights waiting for him, believing his excuses, hoping for affection that never came. She thought of her mother's words long ago. A marriage built on lies will eventually collapse, no matter how beautiful it looks from the outside. Clara had ignored that warning. Now she was living it. A passing cab slowed, the driver rolling down the window to ask if she needed help. Clara shook her head quickly, wiping her tears, forcing a smile she didn't feel. She didn't want pity from strangers. She wanted justice. But justice felt so far away in that moment, swallowed by the weight of her grief. She stumbled toward a nearby bench, sinking down as the cool metal seeped into her bones. She hugged her belly, whispering softly, "I promise you, little one, I won't let him break us. I won't let him take away our future." Her voice shook, but the words anchored her. The baby kicked, and for the first time that night, Clara's sob turned into a shaky laugh. It was as if her child was answering her, giving her the strength she thought she had lost. She wiped her face with trembling hands, taking deep breaths until the storm inside her began to calm. Still, the humiliation clung to her skin. She imagined the headlines tomorrow, the whispers spreading like wildfire. Billionaire introduces mistress at gala. Pregnant wife humiliated. She could already hear the judgmental voices, the cruel gossip disguised as sympathy. But beneath the shame, a flicker of something else stirred. Rage. Clara realized she had two choices: collapse forever under the weight of betrayal, or rise from it. Tonight she had allowed herself to break. But tomorrow, she would begin to rebuild. And when she did, Victor and Selena would regret ever thinking she was weak. A shadow stretched across the sidewalk. Clara looked up, startled, wiping her tears quickly. A tall figure stepped out of the darkness, his voice low, steady, familiar. "Clara," he said, "you don't have to go through this alone." Damien Ward had found her. Clara blinked through her tears, hardly believing what she saw. Standing a few feet away under the street lamp was Damien Ward. His tall frame cast a steady shadow across the pavement, his dark suit immaculate, his expression softened by genuine concern. Unlike Victor's polished arrogance, Damien carried a quiet authority that didn't need cameras to validate it. "Damien," Clara whispered, her voice cracking. "What are you doing here?" He stepped closer, his eyes never leaving hers. "I was inside the gala. I saw everything. I couldn't let you walk out into the night alone." Clara's heart tightened. They had known each other years ago, before Victor, back when she was still working as an architect. Damien had been a client then, a sharp-minded entrepreneur with a rare respect for her work. Their paths had crossed several times, and though nothing had ever happened between them, Clara had always sensed an unspoken admiration in the way he treated her. Now, seeing him again, that quiet strength felt like a lifeline. "I'm fine," Clara said quickly, trying to gather the pieces of her dignity. But her voice trembled, betraying her. Damien crouched slightly so his gaze met hers directly. "No, you're not fine. You just watched your husband humiliate you in front of half the city. No one should carry that alone." The sincerity in his tone broke through the walls she had built around her heart. Tears threatened again, but Clara shook her head fiercely. "I can't afford to fall apart. Not now. Not with." She placed a hand on her belly, the sentence hanging unfinished. Damien's eyes softened further. "I know. That's why you need someone in your corner, and I want to be that person." For a moment, Clara didn't answer. She had spent so long being isolated, silenced, underestimated. The idea of having an ally, a real ally, felt almost too dangerous to hope for. "Why would you help me?" she asked finally, her voice small. Damien's jaw tightened. "Because I know what it's like to lose everything to someone else's greed." "Victor has made enemies before, Clara. You're not the first life he's crushed to climb higher. But you can be the one who finally stops him." His words landed like sparks in the ashes of her despair. For the first time since discovering Victor's betrayal, Clara felt something more than pain. She felt possibility. Damien extended his hand toward her. "You don't have to decide tonight, but if you want to fight back, I'll stand with you. I'll give you the resources, the protection, whatever it takes. You won't be alone in this." Clara hesitated, staring at his hand. The memories of Victor's cruelty flashed in her mind. The dismissive comments, the cold nights, the spectacle of tonight's humiliation. Then she looked at Damien, steady, patient, offering not pity but respect. Slowly, she placed her hand in his. The warmth of his grip sent a tremor through her. It wasn't romantic, at least not yet. It was something deeper. Trust. "I don't know how to fight him," Clara admitted, her voice steadier now. "But I know I can't keep living like this." Damien gave a firm nod. "Then we'll start with the truth. I've already seen things tonight that Victor doesn't want exposed, and I know where to dig deeper." Clara drew in a shaky breath. For the first time in weeks, she felt like the ground beneath her was solid. She wasn't powerless anymore. She had a choice. She had an ally. Damien glanced back toward the glowing hotel. "You've been silent long enough. It's time to make noise." Clara followed his gaze, her pulse quickening. For the first time that night, she allowed herself a faint, determined smile. Victor Hale had just gained an enemy far more dangerous than he realized, and she was carrying his child. The following morning, Clara woke to the soft light filtering through her curtains. For the first time in weeks, she hadn't woken with dread pressing down on her chest. Instead, she felt something else: resolve. The humiliation of the gala had cut deep, but Damien's words still echoed in her mind. "You've been silent long enough. It's time to make noise." She slipped out of bed carefully, her hand resting on her stomach. "We're going to be okay," she whispered to her unborn child. "I'm not going to let him win." Later that afternoon, Clara met Damien at his office. It wasn't like Victor's glass palace of arrogance. Damien's headquarters was grounded in warmth and purpose. Books lined the walls, soft light filled the room, and the man himself sat across from her with an intensity that was steady but never suffocating. "Victor's pride is his weakness," Damien began. "Last night he put his reputation on the line. He wanted the world to see him with Selena, but what he doesn't realize is that the world was watching more than just his smile. They were watching his mistakes." Clara listened, her fingers curling around the warm mug of tea he had set in front of her. "I have evidence," she admitted. "Receipts, messages, even pictures. I kept everything. At first I thought I was just torturing myself by holding on to them, but now—" Damien leaned forward, his eyes sharp. "Now they're your weapons." Clara nodded. "But it's not enough to show the affair. If I go public with just that, he'll spin it. He'll make me look bitter, unstable. He's done it before." "That's why we don't just expose the affair," Damien said firmly. "We expose everything. His financial games, his lies to his board, the money he's funneled to cover Selena's lifestyle. Believe me, Clara, I've seen the numbers. Something doesn't add up." Clara's pulse quickened. For so long she had thought of herself as powerless against Victor. But here was a man showing her the cracks in his empire, cracks she could widen until the whole thing crumbled. "But it has to be done right," Damien continued. "One wrong move and he'll paint you as the villain. We need timing, precision, and the right stage." Clara exhaled slowly, her mind racing. She imagined the smug look wiped off Victor's face, Selena's triumph turning into horror. The thought gave her strength. "What stage?" she asked. Damien's lips curved into a knowing smile. "The next shareholders' meeting. Victor's planning to use it as a victory lap, to solidify his power after last night. But if you walk in with evidence in front of his investors, his board, and the press, it won't just be a scandal. It will be the end of him." The idea sent a shiver down Clara's spine. It was risky, terrifying, but it was also perfect. For years, she had been the silent wife standing in the background. This time, she would be the one to command the room. Damien placed a folder on the desk and slid it toward her. "Inside is a list of people we can trust. Journalists who won't twist the story. Lawyers who can shield you. You're not alone in this fight, Clara. Not anymore." Her eyes burned with sudden tears, not of weakness, but of gratitude. She closed the folder gently, her decision firming inside her like steel. She looked at Damien, her voice calm, steady, filled with a strength she hadn't felt in years. "Then let's take everything from him. The company, the image, the lies. Let's make sure Victor Hale finally pays." Damien gave a sharp nod. "Then it begins." And at that exact moment, Victor Hale was making plans of his own, plans that would soon put Clara in even greater danger. The night of the shareholders' gala arrived with all the glitter and tension of a Broadway premiere. The Crystal Meridian Hotel was glowing brighter than ever. The marble steps lined with velvet ropes and flashing cameras. Black limousines rolled up one after another, spilling out New York's elite in tailored tuxedos and gowns worth more than most people's homes. Reporters shouted questions, bulbs exploded like fireworks, and every smile was polished for the world to see. At the center of it all was Victor Hale, striding confidently up the steps with Selena Cross draped on his arm. She wore a gown of shimmering gold, her hair swept into an elaborate style that exposed her diamond-studded earrings. She looked every bit the queen she imagined herself to be, basking in the scandalous attention. Victor leaned down, whispering something into her ear that made her laugh just loud enough for the cameras to catch. Inside the ballroom, the spectacle continued. Waiters moved like dancers between clusters of guests, pouring champagne into crystal flutes as a string quartet filled the air with music. The board members of Hale Technologies gathered near the stage, their faces politely neutral, though several exchanged glances heavy with doubt. They had heard rumors, but tonight they would see with their own eyes the man who demanded their loyalty. Victor loved it. Every flash of a camera, every admiring glance, every nervous whisper, it was fuel to his ego. He raised his glass and made jokes with investors, his arm never leaving Selena's waist. To him, she was not just a mistress, she was a weapon, a declaration that he answered to no one, not even his pregnant wife. Selena thrived on the attention too. She leaned into him, her smile bright but her eyes sharper, scanning the crowd for anyone who dared look unimpressed. She saw herself as the victor, the woman who had replaced Clara not only in Victor's bed, but now in his empire. Tonight, she believed, would be her official crowning. But what neither of them knew was that Clara Bennett was dressing in a quiet suite just 2 floors above them. In front of the mirror, Clara adjusted the dark navy gown Damien had insisted she wear. It wasn't flashy, but it radiated elegance and strength. The fabric draped over her shoulders, flowing down to highlight her growing belly. She had chosen not to hide it. Tonight, her child was not a weakness. It was her shield, her proof of truth, her undeniable reminder of Victor's betrayal. Damien stood behind her, fastening a delicate necklace around her neck. His reflection in the mirror was calm but resolute. "You're ready," he said simply. Clara met her own eyes in the glass. For the first time in years, she saw a woman who was not broken, but unbreakable. Her lips curved into the faintest smile. "Yes, I am." Damien handed her a slim leather folder. Inside were copies of the receipts, the text messages, the photographs, everything she had kept hidden for months. "When the time comes, give this to the press table. They'll know what to do." Clara's hand lingered on the folder. It was heavier than paper should ever feel, weighted with months of silence, humiliation, and grief. But tonight it would speak for her louder than Victor ever imagined. She straightened, the necklace catching the light like armor. "Let's go," she whispered. Downstairs, the orchestra swelled as Victor stepped onto the stage, preparing to give his grand speech. The crowd hushed, anticipation filling the room like electricity. And then, just as Victor cleared his throat, the great ballroom doors swung open. Clara Bennett had arrived, and every eye turned to her. The ballroom fell into silence the moment Clara Bennett appeared in the doorway. The double doors had opened with a soft creak, but the effect was thunderous. Heads swiveled, whispers cut off mid-sentence, and champagne glasses froze halfway to lips. There she stood, tall and radiant in her navy gown, the gentle curve of her belly visible beneath the flowing fabric. The chandelier light poured over her like a spotlight, catching the necklace at her throat and turning it into a crown. She wasn't hiding. She wasn't ashamed. She was glowing with a power that no humiliation could erase. Damien Ward walked beside her, his presence commanding immediate respect. His steady gaze swept the room, daring anyone to challenge Clara's place there. Together they were a sight that no one expected, and one that no one could ignore. For a few seconds the entire ballroom was still, as if the very air had forgotten how to move. Then the whispers began. "Is that his wife? She's pregnant, my God. She looks incredible." Clara held her chin high, her eyes locked straight on Victor Hale, who stood frozen on stage with his mistress by his side. His confident grin faltered, replaced by a look of disbelief that quickly soured into anger. Selena Cross shifted uncomfortably, clutching Victor's arm, her painted smile cracking. The golden gown that had sparkled moments earlier suddenly felt cheap against the quiet, devastating elegance of Clara's entrance. For the first time that night, Selena wasn't the center of attention. She was the shadow. Clara stepped forward, each stride measured and graceful, her heels clicking against the marble floor in perfect rhythm with the pounding of Victor's heart. Every eye followed her, the whispers growing louder, sharper, until the weight of the scandal pressed down on the entire room. Victor gripped the microphone tightly. "Ladies and gentlemen, allow me to..." But his voice was swallowed by the shift in energy. No one was listening to him anymore. The spotlight had moved, and it wasn't coming back. Clara reached the center of the ballroom, just a few feet from the stage. She paused, turning slightly to face the crowd. Her smile was small but unwavering, a smile that told the world she wasn't broken, she was rising. She placed a hand gently on her belly, the gesture speaking louder than any words could. The audience gasped again, the truth undeniable. Victor Hale had paraded his mistress while his pregnant wife stood before them, proud and unshaken. Selena's nails dug into Victor's arm, her face paling. She whispered something sharp, but he didn't answer. His eyes were locked on Clara, fury and fear battling behind them. He had thought she would stay silent, hidden, forgotten. But here she was, shining brighter than he ever could. Damien leaned in slightly, his voice calm but firm. "Your move, Victor." The tension snapped like a violin string. Guests shifted uncomfortably, some already pulling out their phones, eager to capture every second. Investors exchanged knowing looks, journalists scribbled notes, and the board members whispered in low, urgent tones. The scandal wasn't just personal anymore. It was about to explode into Victor's empire. Victor cleared his throat, his voice cracking despite the microphone. "This is inappropriate. Clara, you shouldn't be here." Clara's eyes met his, steady and unflinching. "On the contrary, Victor," she said, her voice carrying across the ballroom, clear and strong. "This is exactly where I belong." The crowd erupted into gasps. Selina's smile collapsed completely, replaced by panic. Victor tried to speak again, but the noise drowned him out. Clara had taken the stage without ever stepping onto it. And then, with a calmness that sent shivers through the room, Clara reached into her clutch and pulled out the leather folder. The proof of Victor's betrayal was about to be revealed. The leather folder in Clara Bennett's hands might as well have been a ticking bomb. The ballroom, moments earlier filled with polite applause and the clinking of champagne glasses, now vibrated with tension so sharp it could be felt in the bones. Whispers surged like wildfire. "Is that? Documents. She has evidence? This is about Victor, isn't it?" Board members leaned toward one another, their faces pale under the chandelier's golden glow. Journalists at the back instinctively raised their cameras higher, sensing a scandal about to unfold. Guests, draped in couture gowns and diamond necklaces, suddenly looked less like admirers and more like jurors in a courtroom, their eyes fixed on Clara with hungry anticipation. Victor Hale's jaw clenched so tight it looked painful. He gripped the microphone with one hand, his knuckles white, while the other tried to tug Selina closer, as if her presence could shield him from the storm. Selina's glittering smile trembled, the mask slipping to reveal the panic lurking beneath. Her hand twitched nervously at her side, nails digging into her palm hard enough to draw blood. "Clara," Victor snapped, his voice cracking through the speakers. "Put that away? You're embarrassing yourself." But his command only made the whispers louder. The audience leaned in, sensing his fear. Clara stood tall, her face calm, her hands steady on the folder. Her presence wasn't desperate, it was regal, like a queen addressing her court. Selina hissed under her breath, loud enough for the front row to hear. "Don't let her do this, Victor. Stop her." But Victor couldn't stop anything now. Not the cameras flashing, not the pens scribbling, not the investors already calculating what this meant for the empire he had so carelessly flaunted. Clara's voice when it came was steady and clear. "For months, I have remained silent while my husband lived a double life. I endured the whispers, the humiliation, the betrayal. But tonight, I will no longer be silent." The crowd erupted into shocked gasps. A woman at the front covered her mouth with her jeweled hand. A senator's wife whispered, "She's pregnant, and he did this to her?" Others shook their heads, the sympathy in their eyes shifting to outrage. Victor slammed the microphone stand with his palm. "Enough." His voice thundered, but it carried the desperate edge of a man losing control. "This is my event, Clara. You don't belong here." But the crowd was no longer with him. Their eyes had turned cold, judgmental. For years they had admired his wealth and charm, but now they saw the cracks, saw the arrogance, the cruelty, the hypocrisy. Clara slowly opened the folder, pulling out a stack of papers, receipts, hotel bookings, credit card charges for designer jewelry never meant for her, photographs of Victor and Selina, their laughter frozen in the flash of secret cameras. Gasps turned into shocked murmurs. "It's true. He's been funding her with company money. This could ruin him." Selina's face drained of color. She tried to yank Victor toward the exit, but he shook her off, his fury now boiling over. "You think this makes you strong?" He spat at Clara, forgetting the microphone was still live. "You think anyone will believe a bitter hormonal wife?" The crowd recoiled at his words. The cruelty was undeniable. A woman in the back shouted, "We believe her!" And the room erupted with applause, not for Victor but for Clara. Victor froze, stunned. The tide had turned. Clara's eyes glistened, not with tears, but with fierce determination. She lifted the photographs high, letting the cameras catch every detail. "This is who Victor Hale truly is." The ballroom exploded with chaos, reporters rushing forward, investors shouting, security uncertain where to move. In the middle of it all, Clara stood unshaken, her belly a silent declaration of her strength. And then, from the back of the room, a voice rang out above the noise. "Mrs. Bennett, would you care to step onto the stage and finish what your husband started?" The ballroom was no longer a celebration. It had transformed into an arena. The chandeliers blazed above like merciless spotlights, and the sea of faces turned toward the stage with hungry anticipation. The papers in Clara's hands fluttered slightly, not from nerves, but from the force of the air conditioning that hummed above. She stepped forward as a security guard, instinctively moved to stop her. But a board member raised his hand. Let her speak. The command silenced the room. Clara mounted the steps, her heels striking the polished wood of the stage like a judge's gavel. Each step echoed, each step declaring that she was no longer a victim in the shadows. She stood tall, belly visible beneath her elegant gown, the image of both vulnerability and unshakable strength. Victor Hale's face was a mask of fury. He leaned into the microphone, his voice sharp enough to cut glass. "This is outrageous. My wife has no right to?" Clara interrupted, her voice calm but resonant. "No right? I am your wife, Victor. I carried your promises, your lies, and now I carry your child. If anyone here has the right to speak, it is me." The audience gasped. Victor's face twisted, but before he could respond, Clara lifted the photographs high. Cameras flashed, capturing the undeniable proof. Selena Cross, clinging to Victor in hotel lobbies, sliding into his car, wrapped in jewelry bought with money that wasn't his. "You claim to be a visionary," Clara continued, her voice steady. "But what kind of man betrays his family while using his company to fund his mistress? Every receipt, every payment, every lie, it's all here." Selena tugged at Victor's sleeve, whispering desperately, "Stop her, Victor. Do something." But her plea only made him appear weaker. A man scrambling to contain a storm he could no longer control. Victor's jaw tightened. "This is slander. She's unstable. Pregnant women are emotional. The crowd hissed, the disgust spreading like a wave. A woman in pearls muttered loud enough to be heard, "How dare he use her pregnancy against her?" Several investors nodded, their expressions turning icy. Clara did not flinch. She leaned toward the microphone, her eyes locked on Victor's. "Do not mistake my silence for weakness. I stayed quiet because I was waiting for this moment. Tonight you wanted to crown your mistress. Tonight you wanted to humiliate me. But instead you've humiliated yourself." The ballroom erupted in applause. Some guests stood, clapping loudly, their voices cutting through the chaos. Selena shrank back, her golden gown no longer dazzling but garish under the harsh light. Victor slammed his hand on the podium. "Enough. This is my company, my event, my reputation. None of you have the authority to." A calm, measured voice rose from the front row. It was Damian Ward. "On the contrary, Victor, your investors have every authority, and tonight they've seen exactly what kind of man is running their company." All eyes shifted to Damian as he stood, tall and unyielding, his gaze fixed on Victor like a predator circling its prey. Clara turned slightly toward him, a flicker of gratitude crossing her face. The room buzzed with new whispers, louder than before. Investors pulled out their phones calling lawyers, journalists scribbled furiously. The walls of Victor's empire were crumbling, and everyone was watching. Clara faced Victor one last time, her voice calm but sharp enough to pierce his armor. "This ends tonight." Victor's chest heaved, his mask of control finally shattering. He lunged forward, grabbing the microphone, his face contorted with rage. "If you think you can destroy me, Clara, you're gravely mistaken." Victor Hale's voice cracked through the ballroom speakers, raw and jagged. "If you think you can destroy me, Clara, you're gravely mistaken." His hand clutched the microphone as though it were the last lifeline in a storm. Sweat gleamed at his temples, his confident facade unraveling in real time for all to see. The audience, once dazzled by his arrogance, now watched with sharpened eyes. There was no admiration left, only scrutiny. The murmurs grew louder, and some guests laughed nervously, as though they couldn't believe the mighty Victor Hale was reduced to this spectacle. Selena Cross tugged at his sleeve, her voice low and frantic. "Victor, stop! You're making it worse!" But he shoved her hand away with a violent jerk. Gasps rippled through the room. Even those who had tolerated his arrogance could not ignore the ugliness of that gesture. "Worse?" Victor roared, pointing at Clara with a trembling finger. "She's nothing without me. She gave up her career, her life, everything, because I allowed her to. And now she wants to destroy me out of jealousy?" His laughter came out broken, manic, pathetic. Clara stood motionless, her calm composure cutting deeper than any outburst could. She didn't flinch. She didn't cower. The strength in her silence only made his rage look smaller. The investors began shifting uncomfortably. A man in a navy suit leaned toward another board member. "This isn't leadership. This is madness." Another replied, "If he can't control himself here, how can he run a billion-dollar company?" Selena's mask cracked completely. She had envisioned herself bathed in glory, but now she stood exposed beside a man unraveling in front of the world. Her golden gown shimmered under the lights, but her expression was pale with fear. She tried to step back, but Victor yanked her closer, gripping her wrist so tightly she winced. "Look at her," Victor shouted, pulling Selena toward the crowd as though she were a prop. "This woman believes in me. She stands by me. Unlike the wife who—" Selena cut him off, her voice sharp and trembling. "Let me go, Victor. You're humiliating yourself." The audience gasped again. Even the orchestra musicians had stopped playing, their instruments resting silently in their laps. The room was frozen in horror, watching the Empire's golden couple disintegrate before their eyes. Clara's voice finally cut through the chaos, soft but resolute. "You see, everyone? This is who Victor Hale truly is. Not the visionary, not the leader. Just a man who uses, discards, and destroys." Her words landed like thunder. The room erupted into a storm of whispers. Investors pulled out their phones, some already calling their legal teams. A few left their seats entirely, storming toward the exits. Victor's face reddened, veins standing out in his neck. He slammed the microphone onto the podium, the screech of feedback making guests flinch. "You'll regret this, Clara. I'll bury you. Do you hear me? I'll take everything." But no one believed him anymore. His threats sounded desperate, hollow, like the last cries of a king whose crown had already fallen. Damian Ward stepped forward from the crowd, his presence commanding instant silence. "You won't take anything, Victor," he said firmly. "You've already lost it all tonight." The words cut deep. Victor's breathing grew ragged, his eyes darting wildly around the room, searching for support. But all he found were cold, condemning stares. Even Selena slipped her hand free from his grip and stepped away, her face twisted in disgust. For the first time, Victor was alone. Truly, devastatingly alone. And then, as if fate itself wanted to seal his downfall, a voice from the back of the ballroom called out, clear and strong, "We have proof of his financial crimes. Hand it over to the authorities." The words from the back of the ballroom hit Selena Cross like a slap across the face. "We have proof of his financial crimes. Hand it over to the authorities." The crowd erupted into chaos. Reporters surged forward, cameras flashing like lightning in a summer storm. Investors began shouting over one another, their polished manners dissolving into raw panic. The golden image Victor had built was crumbling, and Selena stood right in the middle of the wreckage. For months, she had dreamed of this moment, walking proudly into the spotlight, replacing Clara, becoming the crowned queen of Victor's empire. She had rehearsed her smiles, chosen her gowns, memorized the way to tilt her head for the best angles. But now, all those dreams were ashes. The eyes of the ballroom were no longer filled with envy, they were filled with disgust. There she is, the mistress. She bled him dry with company money. Nothing but a parasite. The whispers stabbed sharper than knives. Selena's smile faltered, her lips trembling as she tried to maintain her composure. She wanted to laugh, to flip her hair, to pretend none of this touched her. But the truth was written all over her face. Fear, humiliation, and the slow realization that she was disposable. Victor, drowning in his own rage, made no move to protect her. Instead, he shoved her forward like a shield. "You want someone to blame?" He barked into the microphone. "Blame her. She wanted the gifts, the trips, the money. She begged for it." The room gasped again. Selena staggered, nearly losing her balance. Her painted smile shattered completely, replaced by fury and horror. She spun toward Victor, her voice shrill. "Don't you dare throw this on me. You promised me everything. You said I was your future." Victor sneered, his mask of charm long gone. "You were never my future, Selena. You were my distraction." The words landed like a blow to her chest. The cameras caught every flicker of her broken expression. The betrayal, the humiliation, the collapse of her golden facade. Gasps turned to murmurs, murmurs to laughter, cruel and mocking. The glamorous mistress was nothing more than a pawn discarded in public. Selena's hands shook as she tried to salvage her dignity. "He's lying," she said weakly, her voice drowned by the swell of reporters closing in. I didn't know." But no one believed her. Screens lit up across the room as guests scrolled through the documents Clara had revealed. Each receipt, each transaction screamed of Selina's complicity. Jewelry worth thousands, vacations disguised as business expenses, transfers from company accounts to private boutiques. The evidence was undeniable. A woman in pearls hissed, "She's just as guilty as he is." Another voice added, "Throw them both out." Selina's knees buckled, and for the first time in her life, she felt truly naked. No gown, no jewels, no charm could shield her from the weight of judgment pressing down on her. She turned desperately toward Victor, reaching for him like a drowning woman, reaching for a lifeline. But Victor shoved her hand away. "Stay out of my way," he growled, his voice dripping with contempt. Selina stumbled backward, the rejection final, devastating. The crowd parted, as if she carried a disease, their eyes condemning, their whispers sharp. She had lost everything, her reputation, her lover, her chance at glory. In that moment, Selina realized the truth she had ignored all along. She was never the queen of Victor's empire. She was just a pawn in his game, and pawns were always sacrificed first. Clara watched quietly from the side, her expression unreadable. She had no need to gloat. Selina's downfall was punishment enough. But just as the weight of shame threatened to crush Selina completely, two men in dark suits entered the ballroom, their badges flashing under the chandelier light. "Victor Hale and Selina Cross, you are under investigation. Please step forward." The ballroom was electric with chaos. Reporters shouting, investors arguing, security guards tightening their circle around Victor and Selina. Yet in the middle of the storm, Clara Bennett stood perfectly still. Her hands rested on her belly, her gown glowing beneath the chandeliers, her presence commanding more respect than any crown could offer. The two investigators had barely finished announcing their charges before the crowd turned again, their eyes drifting back to Clara. She hadn't said a word since revealing the evidence, but her silence carried more weight than all of Victor's shouting. Finally, she stepped toward the microphone. "May I speak?" she asked softly. The room hushed immediately. Even the investigators paused, sensing the importance of this moment. Victor scoffed from behind the podium, but no one cared for his permission anymore. All attention belonged to her. Clara gripped the microphone with steady hands. Her voice, calm but powerful, filled every corner of the ballroom. "For years, I believed in a man who promised me forever. I believed in his words, his dreams, his vision. I gave up my career, my independence, my time, all because I thought love meant sacrifice. But what I didn't realize is that sacrifice without respect is not love. It is slavery." The audience gasped. Several women nodded, tears glistening in their eyes. Even some of the men shifted uncomfortably, her words cutting into places they didn't expect. Clara continued, her voice breaking only for a moment before steadying again. "I carried his lies quietly. I endured the humiliation in silence. But tonight, I chose to speak, not for revenge, but for truth. Because the truth is, no woman deserves to be treated as invisible. No child deserves to grow up in the shadow of deceit." She pressed her palm against her stomach, her eyes shining. "This child will know love, honesty, and dignity. And I will make sure of it, even if I have to raise them alone. I may be pregnant, I may be tired, I may have been betrayed, but I am not weak, and I will never be silent again." The crowd erupted into thunderous applause. Some guests stood, clapping until their hands were red. Reporters captured every word, cameras flashing like fireworks. Investors nodded gravely, several whispering that Clara had shown more leadership in 5 minutes than Victor had in his entire career. Victor slammed his fist against the podium, his face purple with rage. "You think this makes you noble? You're nothing without me, Clara. Nothing." But his words only made the applause louder. Selina shrank further into the background, her disgrace now overshadowed by Clara's strength. Damien stepped forward from the crowd, his eyes locked on Clara with admiration, but he didn't interfere. This was her moment, and everyone knew it. Clara raised her hand, silencing the room once more. Victor may have built an empire, but he forgot something more valuable than money. He forgot loyalty. He forgot integrity. He forgot love. And without those things, his empire was doomed from the beginning. The words struck like a verdict, and the crowd roared again. Victor's empire wasn't just crumbling. It was finished. Clara had taken everything he thought made him powerful and turned it into his downfall. Clara stepped back from the microphone, her eyes glistening but her chin high. For the first time in years, she felt free. But just as the applause reached its peak, Victor lunged forward, grabbing the microphone with a wild look in his eyes. "If I'm going down, Clara, I'm taking you with me." The microphone screeched as Victor Hale snatched it from its stand, his voice dripping with venom. "If I'm going down, Clara, I'm taking you with me." His face twisted with rage, his composure long gone. The crowd gasped, a wave of shock rippling through the ballroom. Clara flinched at the sudden movement, her hand instinctively cradling her belly. But before Victor could take another step toward her, a figure moved swiftly across the stage. Damien Ward. Tall, composed, and radiating authority, Damien placed himself firmly between Victor and Clara. His voice, deep and steady, boomed through the ballroom without the need for a microphone. "That's enough." The entire room froze. Even the investigators paused, sensing the gravity of the moment. Damien's broad shoulders blocked Victor's path, his presence commanding in a way that made the billionaire look suddenly small. Victor sneered. "Stay out of this, Ward. This is between me and my wife." Damien's eyes narrowed, unyielding. "You lost the right to call her your wife the moment you paraded your mistress in front of the world. You lost the right the moment you treated her dignity like a toy. And now you've lost everything else too." The crowd erupted in murmurs of agreement. Several investors even clapped, their approval clear. Selena, still lingering on the edge of the stage, shrank further back, realizing that Victor no longer had a single ally left in the room. Victor's voice cracked with desperation. "You think you can protect her? You think you're better than me?" Damien stepped closer, his voice low but sharp as steel. "No, Victor, I don't think. I know, because protecting her isn't about ego. It's about respect, something you've never understood." The ballroom exploded with applause. Clara's eyes widened with tears, not from fear, but from relief. For the first time, she wasn't standing alone. Someone stood beside her, not to overshadow her, but to shield her when she needed it most. Victor's face reddened as he looked between Clara and Damien. The sight of her standing tall beside another man, stronger, steadier, was a blow his pride couldn't bear. He lunged forward, but Damien moved quicker, grabbing Victor's wrist in midair and twisting it just enough to stop him. The microphone clattered to the floor, its metallic thud echoing like a final judgment. Gasps filled the room again. Security guards surged forward, but Damien raised his free hand, steady and calm. "Let the world see him for what he truly is," he said. Victor struggled, his teeth clenched, but Damien's grip held firm. "You wanted to destroy her, Victor," Damien said, his voice carrying across the silent crowd. "But tonight, you destroyed yourself." The investigators stepped onto the stage, one of them pulling out handcuffs. Victor thrashed wildly. "You'll regret this, Ward. Both of you will regret this." But the words no longer carried any power. The crowd was cheering now, the applause drowning out his rage. For once, Clara wasn't the one trembling. Victor was. His empire, his pride, his mistress, all slipping away in front of cameras that would broadcast his downfall to the entire world. Damien finally released his wrist, letting the investigators move in. Clara stood behind him, her hand on her stomach, her eyes locked on Victor with a calm, quiet triumph. The billionaire who once believed himself untouchable was cornered. And as the investigators prepared to lead him away, Victor turned his head, his eyes burning with hatred. "This isn't over, Clara. Not by a long shot." The ballroom was still buzzing with chaos as the investigators led Victor Hale away in handcuffs, his voice echoing behind him like a broken man's curse. Selena Cross trailed in shame, her golden gown no longer shimmering but sagging like a costume stripped of its magic. Reporters shouted questions, flashbulbs popped, but Clara Bennett heard none of it. Her world had gone quiet. She stood at the edge of the stage, her hand pressed protectively against her stomach, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. For months she had carried this weight alone, the betrayal, the loneliness, the humiliation. Tonight she had released it all, and though the room applauded, the silence inside her heart was what mattered most. Damien Ward stood nearby, watching carefully, ready to shield her again if needed. But he didn't step in. He knew this was her moment. She wasn't the woman who needed saving anymore. She was the woman who had saved herself. Clara lifted the microphone again, her voice trembling at first, but steadying with each word. I want to thank everyone here tonight, not because you've seen my pain, but because you've seen the truth. For too long, I thought silence was strength. I thought patience was loyalty. But tonight I learned something else. Silence is not strength when it allows cruelty to thrive. Loyalty is not love when it is only one-sided. Her voice cracked, and a single tear rolled down her cheek. She didn't wipe it away. She let it fall because it was real. I have carried heartbreak, but I have also carried hope. And tonight I choose hope, not for me alone, but for the life I am bringing into this world. The audience grew still again, the tension shifting into something softer, something reverent. Clara placed her hand firmly on her belly. To my child, I make this vow. You will never grow up believing that love means pain. You will never wonder if you are worthy. You will never live in the shadow of deceit. You will know the power of honesty, dignity, and compassion. That is my promise to you. Tears glistened in the eyes of several women in the crowd. Even hardened businessmen lowered their gazes, ashamed by the reflection of their own failures in her words. Clara's chest rose and fell as she steadied her breath. Victor Hale may have taken years from me, but he did not take my spirit. He may have broken promises, but he will not break me, and from tonight on he will never hold power over me again. The applause that followed was thunderous, but Clara barely heard it. She felt lighter, freer, as though a chain had finally been cut. For the first time in years, she felt like Clara Bennett again. Not Victor's wife, not the victim, but her own woman. Damien stepped closer, his hand brushing lightly against her arm. "You were extraordinary," he whispered. Clara turned to him, her eyes shining with gratitude. "I just told the truth," she said softly. "And sometimes," Damien replied, "that's the most extraordinary thing of all." Clara smiled faintly, a smile born of exhaustion and strength. But deep inside she knew this wasn't the end. Victor's words still echoed in her mind. "This isn't over, Clara." As the applause faded and the crowd began to disperse, Clara felt a shiver of unease. Justice had been delivered tonight, but Victor was not a man who accepted defeat easily. And somewhere beyond the flashing cameras, Victor Hale was already plotting his revenge. The ballroom was nearly empty now. Guests had trickled out, still buzzing with disbelief. Reporters lingered in the lobby to file their stories, and security kept Victor Hale and Selena Cross in custody until investigators could escort them away. The chaos had ended, but Clara Bennett stood quietly by the edge of the stage, exhaustion pressing into her bones. She pressed her hand to her stomach, whispering softly, "We did it." But beneath the relief lingered unease. Victor's final words haunted her. "This isn't over." She knew he was the kind of man who wouldn't surrender, even in defeat. Damien Ward approached, his steps steady and calm. He stopped just a few feet from her, giving her space, but his presence filled the room with a quiet strength. "Clara," he said gently, "you don't have to carry this weight anymore. You don't have to fight alone." Her eyes glistened as she turned toward him. "I don't know how to trust that, Damien. I've lived years with a man who promised to protect me, and all he did was destroy me." Damien's gaze softened. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "I can't erase the years Victor stole from you. But I can promise you this, I will never let him hurt you again. Not you, not your child." The words struck her like a balm against an old wound. She wanted to believe them, but doubt clung stubbornly to her heart. "Promises are easy to make," she whispered. Damien nodded, his expression unwavering. "You're right, promises mean nothing without action. That's why I'm not just saying I'll protect you. I already am. The investigators who walked in tonight, I called them. The journalists who are printing the truth instead of Victor's spin, I sent them your evidence. And the lawyers who will shield you from any counterattack, they're ready, Clara. Every step of this fight, I'm with you." Her breath caught. The walls she had built around her heart trembled, not from fear this time, but from something she hadn't felt in years, safety. Clara's voice cracked as she asked, "Why? Why do all this for me?" Damien hesitated, then spoke with quiet honesty. "Because I believe in you. I always have. Long before tonight, long before Victor, I knew you were stronger than you realized. And now, I won't stand by and let that strength be tested alone." Tears welled in Clara's eyes, spilling down her cheeks. She turned away, ashamed of the emotion, but Damien gently touched her arm. "Don't hide your tears, Clara. They're not weakness. They're proof that you survived." Her shoulders shook as she let herself cry, not from despair but from release. For months, she had been forced to be strong in silence. Tonight, for the first time, she let someone else share the burden. Damien's voice dropped lower, firm but tender. "I'll protect you, and I'll protect your child. Victor won't get near either of you again. Not while I'm here." Clara looked up at him, her face streaked with tears but lit with a fragile smile. "You mean that?" He met her gaze steadily. "With everything I have." For the first time, Clara let herself lean against him, her head resting lightly on his shoulder. She felt the steady rhythm of his heartbeat, strong and unwavering, and for the first time in years, she allowed herself to believe in safety. But outside the glowing ballroom, in the shadows of the city, a black car waited. Inside, Victor Hale sat in silence, his eyes burning with hatred as he watched Clara and Damien through the window. And with a cold smile, he whispered, "It's far from over." The days following the gala were a blur of headlines and breaking news alerts. Every television channel, every newspaper, every online outlet carried the same story. Billionaire Victor Hale exposed, mistress, financial crimes, and betrayal. His once carefully polished image now lay in ruins. Investors abandoned him overnight. Stocks plummeted, lawsuits piled up, and government agencies descended like vultures circling a dying animal. Victor Hale, once untouchable, was now the headline scandal of the decade. But Victor wasn't going quietly. From the confines of his penthouse, now crawling with investigators, he barked orders into his phone, threatening, bribing, begging. "This is a witch hunt. I built this empire, and I'll take down anyone who tries to steal it from me." But the more he fought, the deeper he sank. Every ally he called distanced themselves. Politicians refused to answer his calls. Business partners who once bowed to him now cut ties publicly, claiming they had no knowledge of his misconduct. His empire wasn't just collapsing, it was vanishing, piece by piece, leaving him with nothing but his rage. Selena Cross fared no better. She tried to save herself, granting interviews where she painted herself as the victim of Victor's manipulation. But the evidence was overwhelming. Photographs, receipts, wire transfers, her complicity was undeniable. The glamorous mistress who once bathed in envy was now reduced to tabloid fodder, mocked as a gold digger who fell as quickly as she rose. Meanwhile, Clara Bennett remained silent. She didn't give interviews, didn't pose for cameras. She stayed home, her focus on her child and her healing. But her silence carried power. To the world, she was the dignified survivor, the wronged woman who stood tall while her husband crumbled. That silence made Victor's screams sound even more desperate. And desperate he became. One evening, weeks after the gala, Victor staggered into a board meeting uninvited. Security tried to stop him, but he forced his way inside, his suit wrinkled, his eyes bloodshot. "You can't shut me out," he roared, slamming his fist on the table. "This is my company." The board members stared at him coldly. One slid a folder across the table. "Not anymore, Mr. Hale. You've been officially removed, effective immediately." Victor snatched the folder, flipping through pages filled with legal signatures. His empire, his crown jewel, was gone. A strangled laugh escaped his lips, bitter and broken. "You think you can take what's mine? You think you can erase me?" But as he screamed, cameras hidden in the corners of the room broadcasted the scene to waiting journalists outside. Within minutes, the footage spread like wildfire. The world saw not a billionaire, but a broken man clawing at the ashes of his own downfall. That night, Victor returned to his penthouse, only to find it half empty. Bank accounts frozen, cars seized, artwork repossessed. The investigators had taken everything. For the first time, Victor Hale stood alone in silence. No cameras, no applause, no mistress, no empire, just the hollow echo of his own arrogance. He poured himself a drink, his hands shaking. "They'll see," he muttered. "They'll all see. This isn't the end." But his words fell flat against the walls, meaningless even to his own ears. Across the city, Clara held her belly, whispering to her child, "It's over now. We're free." But in the shadows of Victor's empty penthouse, as he stared out at the city skyline he once ruled, his eyes burned with something darker than defeat. Because a man like Victor Hale wasn't finished. Not until he dragged someone else down with him. Winter's first snow fell over New York City like a blanket of forgiveness. The world had moved on to its next scandal. But Victor Hale's name was still plastered across newspapers. Not for triumph, but for disgrace. His trial was swift and brutal. Fraud, embezzlement, abuse of company funds, charge after charge stacked against him like bricks sealing his own tomb. The courtroom was packed each day, cameras capturing every second of the once mighty billionaire reduced to a trembling defendant. Clara Bennett never attended. She didn't need to. Justice didn't require her presence, it required the truth, and the truth had already been delivered. She stayed home, her hand always resting on her growing belly, focusing on the only future that mattered now. When the verdict was read, guilty on all counts, the city exhaled in satisfaction. Victor was sentenced to years in prison, stripped of his wealth, his empire, and his reputation. The man who once believed himself untouchable was now just another inmate, his name no longer commanding fear but pity and scorn. Selena Cross disappeared into obscurity. Once photographed under flashing lights, she now avoided cameras like poison. Every door she once forced open was shut tight, her name synonymous with greed and betrayal. For her, the punishment was not prison, but irrelevance, a life of whispers and shame, forever tied to the scandal that destroyed her golden fantasy. For Clara, however, life began anew. On a quiet morning, she walked through a small garden near her apartment. Snow dusted the benches and bare branches, the city muted under the white hush of winter. Damian Ward walked beside her, his scarf wrapped loosely around his neck, his steady presence a constant reminder that not all men broke their promises. "You don't have to thank me," Damian said when she glanced at him with gratitude. "You did this. You stood up for yourself when the world wanted you silent." Clara smiled softly, brushing snowflakes from her coat. "Maybe. But I couldn't have done it without knowing someone believed in me. For so long, I thought I was invisible. Now I know better." They sat on a bench, the silence between them comfortable, filled with unspoken possibilities. Clara placed Damian's hand gently on her belly, where the baby kicked as if to remind them both of the life waiting ahead. For the first time, Clara allowed herself to imagine joy. Not survival, not revenge, but joy. The months passed and spring replaced the snow. Clara gave birth to a healthy baby girl, her cries filling the hospital room like music. Clara wept as she held her daughter, whispering the promise she had spoken months earlier. "You will never grow up believing that love means pain. You will know dignity. You will know truth." Damian stood nearby, tears glistening in his own eyes. He wasn't replacing Victor. He wasn't claiming what wasn't his. He was simply there, steady and true, ready to help build whatever future Clara chose. The world had tried to break her. Victor had tried to erase her. Selena had tried to replace her. But none of them had succeeded. Clara Bennett had walked through betrayal, humiliation, and despair, and emerged not as a victim, but as a woman reborn. And as she cradled her daughter under the soft morning light, Clara whispered with quiet certainty, words that belonged not just to her, but to every woman who had ever been silenced. "I am not weak. I am not invisible. I am free." So that's how our story comes to an end. And if you're still here with us right now, my dear friends, then I know something in Clara's journey must have touched your heart in some way. Maybe it reminded you of your own struggles, or maybe it whispered to you that even in betrayal and loss, we can rise again stronger than before. The Stoic philosopher Epictetus once said, "It's not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters." Clara's story is proof of that. She could have stayed broken, but instead she chose dignity, truth, and the courage to build a new life. And that's something we all can carry into our own lives, whether it's in love, family, or the daily battles no one else sees. If this story spoke to you, don't let it end here. Share it with someone who needs hope, hit the like button so we know you're with us, and subscribe to the channel so we can keep walking through these stories of pain, healing, and triumph together. Because remember, my friends, we are never as powerless as we feel.